Let me ask you something. If you had $2.5 million saved, would you actually feel comfortable spending it? Because I'm seeing more and more CRNAs and nurse practitioners retire with plenty of money and still afraid to use it. Not because they don't have enough, but because they spent the last 30 years learning how to save and never learned how to switch gears and spend. And that mistake, well, it's quietly costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes and some of the best years of their life. But before I get into today's topic, I want to share that my firm, Oak Capital Advisors, is currently accepting new clients for the summer of 2026. We do comprehensive financial planning. That means retirement income strategy, tax planning, Social Security timing, Medicare, estate planning, all of it, not just investment management. And we specialize in high-earning nurses, specifically CRNAs and nurse practitioners. If you have been listening to this show for a while and you've been thinking about working with someone who actually understands your situation, now is a good time to reach out. The link to schedule a discovery meeting is in the show notes. All right, on to today. So most of the couples that I work with did everything right. They maxed out their 403Bs and 401Ks for the last 20 to 25 years. They picked up extra shifts for the higher rate. They delayed vacations. They drove the same car longer than they wanted to. They built real wealth. And then they retire and nothing changes. They're still living like they're in saving mode. Still watch every dollar. They're still hesitating before booking the trip. Still asking themselves at the dinner table, are we spending too much? Except now, there is no paycheck coming in to reassure them. There's just a big number on an account statement that they really don't want to touch. And here's what makes it expensive. Every year you underspend in retirement, those 403B and 401K balances continue to grow. And when required minimum distributions start at age 73, the IRS forces that money out at whatever tax bracket it lands in. Larger account balance equals larger tax bill. You then put Social Security on top of that, and you're now looking at Medicare surcharges too. So why does this happen? Well, it comes down to something simple: how the money shows up. Let me tell you about Chris and Heather. Now, this is a hypothetical example similar to one of our client households, and I've changed the names to be anonymous. Chris is a CRNA. He's 62 and retired 3 years ago. Heather was a nurse practitioner. She's 60. She retired 2 years ago. And they have a retirement nest egg with about 2.5 million. And almost all of it is sitting in pre-tax 403Bs from their hospital systems. They have no debt, strong savings, and everything you would want on paper. But 3 years into their retirement, they were only spending about $6,800 a month, while their plan could support over $10,500 a month. So they were leaving about $3,700 a month on the table every single month. And yet every month they continued to hold back. Not because they needed to, obviously, but because it didn't feel safe. When we looked at their full picture, 3 things stood out that explained exactly why they were stuck. The first thing is they were spending income, not savings. So when money hits your checking account every month, you treat it like income. You spend it. But when it's sitting in a portfolio, you treat it like it's something for you to protect. So it could be the same amount of money, but completely different behavior. In fact, studies show that retirees tend to spend about 80% of their guaranteed income, but only around 50% of their portfolio assets. So the form that money takes changes behavior more than the amount does. A dollar sitting in a monthly deposit gets treated like a paycheck. A dollar sitting in a brokerage account gets treated like an emergency fund. So every dollar that gets converted to a predictable income stream results in roughly twice the spending compared to a dollar sitting in a portfolio. The lump sum triggers loss aversion to us. A monthly deposit triggers normalcy. So Chris and Heather weren't being irrational. They were reacting exactly how most people do. Which brings us to the second thing. What they were planning for almost certainly was not going to happen. So Heather kept saying, well, what if we need this money later? We worked too hard just to blow it. Now, I hear that exact sentence from APRNs all the time, and I understand the fear. But the data paints a very different picture. Out of 100 people who reach the age of 65, 52 of them will never need paid long-term care at all. Another 33 will have moderate costs, and only 15 face the kind of catastrophic costs that people fear. But most retirees, Chris and Heather in this example, live like they're guaranteed to be in that 15% category. And in doing that, they sacrifice the years when they're actually healthy enough to enjoy life, the travel, the family visits, to do the things that you frankly spent 30 years postponing. So Chris and Heather had set aside $400,000 just in case. And that decision alone was shaping every other decision that they made. Which naturally brings us to the third thing. The real cost of their caution was not missed vacations. It was actually future taxes. Right now, with both of them retired and Social Security not yet started, Chris and Heather are in the lowest tax bracket they'll likely ever see again. This period right after retirement, before Social Security, before RMDs, this is the Roth conversion window. The opportunity to move money out of those tax-deferred 403Bs into tax-free Roth accounts at a lower tax rate. Chris and Heather were living on about $80,000 a year when they could safely spend $126,000. So that $46,000 gap, this wasn't just unused lifestyle money. That was a $46,000 Roth conversion opportunity they could be doing every single year at a low tax rate. But instead, that money stayed in the tax-deferred 403B, growing larger and creating a bigger future tax bill. 26% of retirees withdraw funds based solely on the RMD schedule. So they have no spending strategy or no tax strategy. They let the IRS decide when and how much comes out. Chris and Heather were on that very same path. Now, let me bring Medicare into this. At the highest IRMA tier, a married couple pays approximately $18,740 a year in Medicare surcharges alone. The threshold for married filing jointly is $218,000 in modified adjusted gross income. When Chris and Heather's RMDs combine with their Social Security in their 70s, they would easily cross that line. Not because they were spending too much, but because they spent too little in their 60s. So 3 separate problems, all rooted in the same belief that being responsible with money means not spending it. So we had to shift the question, not to how do we make sure you don't run out of money, but how do we help you actually use it confidently? Because what they needed wasn't more discipline. They had plenty of that. What they needed was permission. So we built for them a simple structure around three things, and we actually call this the retirement spending blueprint. It converts a nest egg into three distinct buckets. One, a monthly spending paycheck. Two, a tax optimization engine. And three, a ring-fenced care reserve. Here's how it worked for Chris and Heather. The first step was building their retirement paycheck, a predictable monthly payment that replaces the lump sum mentality with income-style spending. So we took their actual monthly expenses, not their pre-retirement income amount, but their real costs in retirement. We then subtracted what Social Security will provide once they claim their benefit. And now, whatever that gap was, is the number that their portfolio needed to cover. And for Chris and Heather, that real gap was about $4,200 a month from the portfolio, not the full $10,500 per month, because the rest was already going to be handled by Social Security that they hadn't started yet. Then we set up a monthly transfer from their investment account to their checking account. Same amount, same day, every month. So instead of them staring at a portfolio balance, they experienced income again. And like I mentioned before, when money shows up like income, it gets spent like income. Second, we next contained the fear. And we did this by carving out a long-term care reserve. So $150,000 set aside in a conservative allocation, which should grow to roughly $300,000 by their late 70s, early 80s. That number is enough to cover a realistic long-term care scenario. And once that was separated from the rest of the portfolio, their fear stopped bleeding into everything else. And third, we built a Roth conversion strategy for Chris and Heather. So each year we converted enough to fill up their current tax bracket without triggering IRMA surcharges, thus reducing their future tax burden 1 year at a time. And here's what changed. Their monthly spending went from $6,800 a month to just over $10,000 a month. There's no added risk. There's no added fear of running out of money. It was just alignment with what their plan already supported. With the Roth conversion strategy executed over the next 10 years, they are on track to save over $180,000 in lifetime taxes. And the trip to Italy that they had been putting off for 3 years, they finally booked it. Chris said something to me I'll never forget. He said, "I feel like I just got permission to enjoy the money I spent my whole life earning." So if you are heading into retirement or you're already there, here are 3 things for you to take away from today. 1, underspending isn't always discipline. Sometimes it's actually a compounding tax mistake. 2, money does not feel spendable until it looks like income. So build the paycheck. And 3, the years between retirement and roughly age 73 are the most valuable tax planning window you will ever have. Do not waste time on the sidelines. If you're a CRNA or a nurse practitioner sitting on a portfolio that you've been afraid to touch, I built a free retirement assessment for you. It walks you through this exact process and shows you whether you have a spending gap, a tax gap, or both. It takes about 10 minutes, and the link is in the show notes. And it might just give you the same clarity that Chris and Heather found. Thank you for listening to this episode of Money RX for CRNAs and nurse practitioners. I'm Brett Fellows. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your money.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. This podcast does not engage in rendering legal, financial, or other professional services.